You know what the problem with bodybuilding is? It's exciting and fun and motivating, but it also takes a long time. Building muscle is a slow process, and there's only so much you can do. Realistically, there's not much point in training more than say 3 to 14 hours per week. 3, maybe even 1 or 2 being the bare minimum, and 14 being the extreme example, only necessary for elites, if anyone. Any more than that, and you run the risk of doing more than you can recover from. If you're extra motivated, maybe you could add another 10 hours of cardio per week, which again is probably much more than enough on a structured bodybuilding program. But even at the extreme end, this is only 24 hours of exercise per week, or 1/7 of your time. Even accounting for sleep, 24 hours of exercise is less than a quarter of your waking life. And remember, most people will be doing much less than half of this. This means if you become hooked on bodybuilding, the vast majority of your time is going to be spent thinking about it, rather than actually doing it. This is why discussions on what's optimal are so common. If you can only train so much per week, and the main obstacle between you and becoming big enough to look like you lift is time, it makes sense you'd want to get as much out of that training time as you can. Trouble is, the difference between optimal and not is really only a matter of degrees. The truth is, if you take the time to train every muscle each week and improve, the body will grow, regardless of which method was used. You could spend the next 10 years learning about different training and periodization methods, only to realize that your initial gut feeling was correct. If you want big biceps, do curls. What are you supposed to do then? Well, there are really 3 main paths you can follow. Down path 1, you get hooked on theory. Even knowing training time is limited and growth takes a while, you can't help it. You've caught the bug and there's no going back. This path is almost like a treasure hunt. You're constantly actively looking for that hidden gem, that secret method that will take you to the next level. Even knowing it might not be out there, the hunt is addicting. This is where most of us here on YouTube Fitness are at. Always reading or watching videos in search of that glorious golden tidbit. Even if this path ends up being a loop that eventually leads you back to that original understanding, curls build biceps, there is a lot to learn along the way. Path number 2 is for those with other things going on. If you go to the gym and train hard, the gains will be more or less the same, whether you know the theory or not, so who cares? Get a basic understanding of how things work, or hire a trainer, work hard a few times a week, and live the rest of your life without thinking about the gym. There's nothing wrong with path 2, and most people probably end up here. In some ways, you might say this is the easier path, because if you're not thinking about it all the time, it's less obvious that muscle gains happen so slowly. You might even be better off in the end with this one, as less time focused on the intricate details of training means more time to focus on other important life things. Paths 1 and 2 have been the extreme ends of the spectrum, in all the way or in just enough. Path number 3 is a bit more nuanced, and is the path I'd like to talk most about today. Let's say you find yourself down path number 1. You can't get enough, but you're unwilling to accept that there's a limit to how much you can do. Well, there's really only 2 ways to go about it. 1, keep pushing the basic bodybuilding exercises until you run yourself into a wall and need a major deload or you get injured. Or 2, find a skill to master. A good way down path number 1 might come the realization that it's not necessarily bodybuilding that has you so excited, but figuring out that using your body for something more than what's required in normal everyday life actually feels pretty awesome, and you want more of it. Getting bigger is a great reward for all the effort, but maybe the effort itself is just as exciting. Here's where skill acquisition comes into play. Maybe you can't build muscle any faster than you already are. Well, okay, but there's no doubt you could get better at something you find meaningful at the same time. The trick to this idea is finding a skill that lets you continue overloading the muscles as you improve. The sandbag to shoulder is a great example. If you want to shoulder anything heavy, you will need a great deal of skill and lots of practice to get there, and in the process of doing so, your back will completely transform in size and shape. This is the whole idea behind path number 3. Maybe paths 1 and 2 are more efficient if your goal is building muscle, but path number 3 gets us there while also giving us something more. Maybe 3 sets of RDLs and 3 sets of pull-ups will build as much muscle as is possible in a given session. Just a hypothetical, by the way. You could probably finish that workout in 20 minutes and sufficiently stimulate the backside of the body. Well, what if you instead do 1 set each of pull-ups and RDLs, then spend a half hour working on the sandbag to shoulder, plus another half hour working on technique with a lighter weight? Sure, the second workout is less efficient because it takes longer, but that's the whole point. Path number 3 is for those who want more. With the second workout, you'll still build the muscle, but you also get better at something. And just as a side note, in this example from personal experience, I'm actually starting to believe you could probably get to that same place without the pull-ups and RDLs altogether. Sandbags are crazy effective. Path number 3 allows you to satisfy your need to do more while still building the muscle you wanted in the first place. There are many more examples of skill-based training that builds muscle as a side effect too. Take the entirety of skill-based calisthenics, for example, or powerlifting or strongman, Olympic lifting, biking, arm wrestling, sprinting, swimming, grip sport, or climbing. I could go on. The idea isn't to replace your regular training entirely, but to push that training as far in the direction of your chosen sport as you can. This takes trial and error, research and studying, nod back to path number 1, and a willingness to fail sometimes. Let's say you've decided you like the Olympic snatch, and that will become your sport. There is, of course, decades of research on how to get good at Olympic lifting at the expense of everything else, but we can't forget that we're bodybuilders first and foremost. We don't want to snatch 300 pounds if it means neglecting the chest, so our first course of action would be to look at which muscles the snatch hits and act accordingly. This is predominantly a posterior chain exercise, so the first step would be to look at our bodybuilding program and replace some of our posterior chain work with the snatch. How much you replace will come down to trial and error, but over time you will figure it out. And don't forget that because this is a skill, there's always more you can do. This is the major difference between just adding the snatch to a bodybuilding routine and chasing the skill because you like it. Maybe you spend some time with heavier weights in your regular training session, but now you have something you can practice in your off time as well. Even if your program calls for an off day, you can still practice your snatch technique using a broom handle and improve without hindering recovery. Over time, you might experiment with lowering your volume on everything, not just the posterior chain exercises, but everything you do, and adding in even more heavy snatch practice. How much can you take away while still building a reasonable amount of size in the muscles unrelated to the snatch? There is endless room for experimentation, and the sweet spot is probably a lot further along that path than you might expect. Maybe you feel excited about multiple skills at once. Again, all you need to do is act accordingly. Over time, you might start to realize that while the gym is very effective and efficient, it's far from the only way to build muscle. At the end of the day, tension is tension, regardless of where it comes from. Leg day at the gym? Nah, I'll lift sandbags and sprint. Chest day? Screw that, I'm becoming a master at the bench press. Shoulder day? Ha, I press boulders over my head. Who knows, maybe you'll replace the gym stuff entirely. It's all up to you how you want to spend your time. There is a very fine line we walk when talking about this stuff. On one hand, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that muscle was our original goal, but on the other hand, learning something cool is a great way to spend an afternoon. Path number 3 isn't for everyone. In fact, it probably isn't for most people, but for those who want more, maybe this skill approach is worth a shot. One final thing before I go, and I don't mean this as an attempt to persuade you of anything, but what's your plan once you build the muscle you want? What do you hope to achieve by having bigger muscles? Or what is it that can't be achieved until you do? There's no correct answer to the question. Anything is valid, but in my personal experience, there's only one response that guarantees very long-term success: nothing. We can't forget that bodybuilding is a lifelong endeavor, and you can't just stop once you reach a certain point. If you want to hold on to what you've built, you must keep going. If your plan is, once I get enough muscle, I can start living and having fun, I can get the girl and I can party and everyone will like me, you're in for a surprise. Life with muscle is pretty much the same as life without. Sure, there will be a brief period where you feel on top of the world, but as with all things, eventually that will level out and you'll realize you're still you, same as before. You could have done all those things I mentioned from the start if you wanted to. There's no prize at the end other than the satisfaction of seeing what you've built, what you've accomplished, the satisfaction of feeling as though you've won at something you enjoy. I don't mean to downplay this part of it. Succeeding in bodybuilding is great, but if you think one day suddenly everything will be different because you got swole, you're most likely wrong. Let me ask you a question. How would you like to spend your life? I think if they really thought about it, most would respond, I'd like to spend my life doing things I enjoy. Well, if bodybuilding is something you plan on doing for the rest of your life, you better enjoy the process. This is why the best reason to pursue optimal bodybuilding isn't to get a prize at the end, but because it makes you happy, because you enjoy doing it while you're doing it, and that's enough. For many people, training for muscle with traditional methods is all they need, but for some, it isn't. To some people, the idea of pulling and pressing cables for the rest of their lives sounds bland and isn't sustainable. This is where skill comes into play. We can talk about how shouldering sandbags builds muscle all day, but the real reason to do it is because it's fun, it's a game. What we all really want is to get lost in something, to be so excited about it that everything else slips from our mind. Back to the question, how would you like to spend your life? Modern thought processes would say you should just continue working towards some kind of goal you'll one day reach in the future for the rest of your life, and whether you actually reach it or not is irrelevant. Okay, sure, that makes for great employees, but I'd wager it's just as likely you've already arrived. That place you hope to one day get to once you've finally done enough is actually here, right now. The only real question then, that needs answering, within reason please, is what sounds fun? What type of game would I like to get into? Bodybuilding is a fun game. Going down path number 1 and searching for optimal and going to the gym and all that can be very enjoyable. As can path number 2 if you've already found something else completely unrelated to all this exercise stuff that you enjoy. But if you're not satisfied with muscle as your one and only goal, maybe going down path 3 and getting good at something in addition to getting big is the way for you. And that's going to be it for today. I hope you like this one. Which path are you on? Would you consider working towards a skill? Let me know. I love hearing from you guys. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.